What if the monster under your bed wasn't just a children's story, but a supernatural assassin forged through dark magic? Across southern Africa, the Tokoloshe is deeply feared as a knee-high, invisible predator sent by vengeful witches to strangle victims in their sleep. But the truth behind this terrifying myth is far more mind-blowing than you think. In this video, we will expose the gruesome necromancy used to create this beast, the shocking true crime and murder cases committed in its name, and the incredible scientific reality that proves this legendary monster actually saved thousands of human lives. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why millions of people still raise their beds on bricks, and why, tonight, you might want to do exactly the same. Imagine waking up in the dead of night. The air in your room is suffocatingly thick, heavy with an unnatural silence. You try to move, to call out for help, but your limbs are completely paralyzed. A crushing weight presses down on your chest. Out of the corner of your eye, in the deepest shadows near the floor, something begins to shift. It is small, no taller than a child, but the malice radiating from it is ancient and overwhelming. You catch a glimpse of matted hair, elongated, bony fingers, and piercing eyes that seem to glow with a dark, predatory intelligence. You are not alone in the room. You have just been visited by the Tokoloshe. Across the vast and culturally rich landscapes of southern Africa, from the bustling, neon-lit streets of Johannesburg to the quiet, rolling hills of KwaZulu-Natal, there is one name that commands absolute, chilling respect. It is a name often spoken only in hushed whispers, a creature that transcends generations, languages, and social classes. The Tokoloshe, also known in various regional dialects as the Tokoloshe, Tokoloshe, or Hili, is arguably the most notorious, complex, and deeply feared mythological entity on the African continent. But to dismiss the Tokoloshe as merely a simple fairy tale, a boogeyman invented to frighten disobedient children into eating their vegetables or going to bed on time, would be a profound mistake. This creature is not a relic of a forgotten past, confined to dusty history books or rural campfires. It is a living, breathing component of modern South African society. The Tokoloshe is a supernatural hitman, an agent of jealousy, a scapegoat for the unexplainable, a symptom of environmental hazards, and a profound psychological mirror reflecting the deepest traumas of a nation. Today, we are going to tear back the veil on this terrifying entity. We will explore its grotesque anatomy, the dark necromantic arts required to bring it to life, the ingenious scientific realities hiding behind the myth, and the bloody footprint it continues to leave on modern law, pop culture, and society. If you were to encounter a Tokoloshe, assuming it allowed you to see it, the sight would be enough to shatter your sanity. The physical descriptions of the creature vary slightly, depending on whether you are listening to Zulu, Xhosa, or Soto folklore, but a terrifyingly consistent archetype remains. The Tokoloshe is universally described as a diminutive, dwarf-like figure, typically standing no higher than an adult human's hip. Despite its small stature, its presence is overwhelmingly threatening. Its body is often covered in a thick, dark, and shaggy coat of hair, giving it a somewhat primate-like or gremlin-like appearance. Its face is flat and grotesque, featuring small, pinned-back ears and eyes that are either pitch black or glowing with an eerie, unnatural light in the dark. Its hands end in long, bony fingers, equipped with razor-sharp claws, perfectly evolved for grasping, scratching, and strangling its victims as they sleep. However, two highly specific anatomical anomalies elevate the Tokoloshe from a standard goblin to a creature of pure, visceral horror. The first is a brutal cranial deformity. The creature is almost always depicted as having a deep, burned hole or a thick, bony ridge on the crown of its head. Sometimes this horrific wound is plugged with a piece of bone or a metal rod. As we will discover later, this is not a natural birth defect, but the result of the gruesome, violent ritual used to create the monster. The second defining feature is one of profound psychological and physical violation. In many traditions, particularly those warning adults, the male Tokoloshe possesses a massive, hyper-exaggerated penis. The appendage is described as being so disproportionately large that the creature must sling it over its own shoulder simply to walk. This grotesque detail is not merely for shock value. It underlines the Tokoloshe's terrifying role as a sexual predator. The creature is frequently summoned and dispatched specifically to violate women in their sleep, ruin marriages, and inflict a deeply traumatizing form of spiritual and physical abuse. Yet, perhaps the most dangerous attribute of the Tokoloshe is its ability to simply vanish. The creature is a master of invisibility. According to the lore, it achieves this supernatural camouflage by drinking water or swallowing a magical pebble. Once this is done, the Tokoloshe becomes entirely invisible to adults, though it is said that children can still see it, which only isolates and terrifies young victims even further. It can teleport across vast distances, cast illusions, and slowly drain the vital life force of its victims, leaving them wasting away from inexplicable illnesses. It is the ultimate apex predator of the spiritual realm. Unlike many monsters of global mythology that are born of nature or descended from ancient gods, the Tokoloshe is an entirely artificial abomination. It is a biological weapon, an occult automaton forged through malice, jealousy, and the darkest arts imaginable. To understand its genesis, one must first understand the spiritual healers of southern Africa. Traditional medicine and spirituality are cornerstones of society, with over 80% of the population consulting traditional practitioners. There are sangomas, who are highly respected spiritual healers, diviners, and mediums who communicate with the ancestors. And there are inyangas, who are skilled herbalists and doctors. Their primary goal is to heal, protect, and restore balance to the community. But there is a darker side to this coin. The Omthakathi, or the evil witch, manipulates these same spiritual forces not to heal, but to destroy. It is these practitioners of dark magic who are responsible for bringing the Tokoloshe into existence. The ritual to create the Tokoloshe is a masterclass in macabre necromancy. The dark shaman does not conjure the beast from thin air. They require a physical vessel. The most common and horrifying method involves the desecration of the dead. The witch will locate a freshly buried human corpse and exhume it under the cover of darkness. What follows is an act of sheer, unadulterated brutality. To ensure that the reanimated corpse cannot think for itself, cannot rebel, and remains an absolute mindless slave to the witch's commands, the shaman takes a glowing red-hot iron poker. This searing rod is driven directly into the eye sockets and through the crown of the skull, completely destroying the brain. This is the origin of the creature's gouged out eyes and the infamous hole in its head. Once the vessel has been violently lobotomized, the witch applies specialized, dark mutia, highly potent mixture of magical powders, animal parts, and herbal balms. This alchemical cocktail causes a horrific transformation. The flesh of the corpse rapidly shrinks, blackens, and withers away, compressing the once human body into a tiny, deformed, hairy dwarf. The Tokoloshe is born. But such dark magic demands a heavy toll. The universe requires balance, and the creation of a Tokoloshe relies on a strict, inescapable Faustian bargain. The client, usually a deeply jealous individual seeking revenge against a successful neighbor, a rival, or a former lover, must pay for the monster's services with a soul for a soul. The client promises the life of a loved one to the beast. The cruel twist is that the client cannot choose who will die. The Tokoloshe decides. Weeks, months, or even years after it has completed its mission of terror, the creature will return to claim its payment, resulting in the sudden, unexplained death of the client's child, spouse, or sibling. It is a terrifying deterrent, a warning that utilizing dark magic will ultimately destroy you and everything you hold dear. If a vengeful witch targets you, how do you survive a monster that can turn invisible, teleport through locked doors, and strangle you in your sleep? The answer lies in one of the most iconic, visible, and widespread cultural practices in southern Africa: raising the bed. In urban townships and rural villages alike, it is incredibly common to find beds elevated high off the floor, the legs resting precariously on stacked house bricks or empty paint cans. The mythological reasoning is brilliantly simple. The Tokoloshe is short, its limbs are stubby, and it is notoriously clumsy and incapable of climbing. Therefore, by hoisting the bed 3 or 4 feet into the air, the sleeper is physically removed from the monster's hunting ground. You are literally out of its reach. However, beneath this supernatural defense mechanism lies a fascinating, empirically proven scientific reality, a reality where a myth actually saved thousands of lives. Historically, during the bitterly cold winter nights on the high veld of South Africa, indigenous people slept on woven grass mats directly on the floor of their traditional circular thatched roof homes, known as rondavels. To survive the freezing temperatures, families would keep a wood fire burning inside the enclosed, poorly ventilated space throughout the night. As the fire burned, it rapidly consumed the oxygen in the small room, replacing it with massive quantities of highly toxic carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Because these noxious gases are heavier and denser than pure breathable air, they did not rise to the roof. Instead, they sank, pooling into a thick, invisible, deadly layer right at floor level. When morning came, communities would wake to horrific tragedies. Entire families, perfectly healthy the day before, would be found dead on their sleeping mats without a single mark of violence on their bodies. In a time before the widespread understanding of biochemistry and invisible toxic gases, the culture desperately needed an explanation for this silent, invisible killer that choked people to death in the dark. The Tokoloshe provided that explanation perfectly. It was small. It lived on the floor. It was invisible. And it stole the breath from your lungs. Over time, astute observers noticed a life-saving pattern. The only people who survived these mysterious nighttime massacres were those who slept on elevated surfaces, like cots or raised beds. The culture adapted by convincing the population to raise their beds on bricks. To escape the mythological claws of the Tokoloshe, they inadvertently lifted their heads above the lethal sinking layer of carbon monoxide. The fear of a fictional monster became a highly effective, evolutionary mandate for public health. While carbon monoxide explains the historical origins of the death associated with the Tokoloshe, modern medical science offers an explanation for the terrifying encounters themselves. The vivid, visceral descriptions of a Tokoloshe attack, waking up paralyzed, feeling a crushing weight on the chest, being unable to scream, and sensing an evil presence in the rumored textbook clinical symptoms of sleep paralysis. During the REM cycle of sleep, the human brain temporarily paralyzes the body to prevent us from acting out our dreams. Sometimes, the brain wakes up before the body does. Caught in this terrifying liminal space between waking and dreaming, the panicked mind projects its deepest cultural fears into the bedroom. While a European might hallucinate a demon or an incubus sitting on their chest, a person raised in the mythos of South Africa will inevitably hallucinate the Tokoloshe. But the creature is much more than a hallucination. It is a powerful sociological tool that regulates behavior through what anthropologists call the economy of jealousy. In many tight-knit communities, sudden individual success is viewed with deep suspicion. If you suddenly get a promotion, buy a new car, or boast about your wealth, you disrupt the social equilibrium. You attract envy. And envy breeds the Tokoloshe. Because everyone knows that the Tokoloshe is summoned by jealous neighbors or bitter rivals, the fear of the creature forces people to remain humble. You share your wealth, you downplay your success, and you respect your community, lest someone visit a dark witch and send a hairy assassin to your door. Conversely, when tragedy strikes, when a crop fails, a job is lost, or sudden illness takes hold, the Tokoloshe provides a comforting psychological scapegoat. It is much easier to blame a malicious, invisible goblin sent by an envious enemy than it is to accept the random, chaotic cruelty of the universe. The belief in the Tokoloshe is so absolute, so ingrained in the psychological fabric of society, that it regularly spills over from folklore into the very real, very bloody world of true crime and the South African legal system. In the 1950s, the nation was terrorized by a ruthless serial killer named Elifasi Msomi, who murdered 15 people. When finally captured, Msomi did not claim insanity or a troubled childhood. He stood before the judges and claimed that he was entirely innocent, stating that he was possessed and commanded by a Tokoloshe, which forced him to commit the atrocities. Though he was ultimately hanged, his defense cemented the creature's place in modern criminal history. The legal system of South Africa frequently grapples with cases where deep-seated cultural beliefs clash with Western legal frameworks. Consider the tragic post-constitutional case of Svilatha in 2012. 2 young men brutally murdered their 86-year-old grandmother. They did not kill her for money or out of random malice. They killed her because they harbored an absolute, terrifying conviction that she was an evil witch who was using dark magic, like the Tokoloshe, to systematically destroy their family. The High Court faced an impossible dilemma. The men were murderers, yet they lacked the traditional criminal intent, acting instead out of a desperate, paralyzing fear for their own lives. Recognizing that their belief in witchcraft was a genuine, subjective reality that drove them to mob hysteria, the court accepted this belief as a mitigating factor, reducing a mandatory life sentence to 20 years. It is a stark reminder that when a society believes a monster is real, the consequences are undeniably real. If you want to see the pulse of this belief today, you only need to look at the front pages of the Daily Sun, South Africa's most widely read and incredibly influential tabloid newspaper. The Daily Sun has built a media empire by treating the supernatural with absolute, journalistic sincerity. Headlines screaming, "Cursed by Ghost Lover," or "My Magosha Child Runs Wild," regularly share the front page with stories of the Tokoloshe. In 2015, the paper ran a front-page expose about a 52-year-old woman named Susan, who claimed an evil Tokoloshe had been torturing and sexually assaulting her in her bedroom for over a year. The situation was deemed so severe that 6 different church pastors were dispatched to her shack to wrestle with the invisible entity, an event witnessed by hundreds of terrified community members. While elite critics often scoff at these stories, sociologists argue they serve a vital purpose. The Daily Sun validates the spiritual cosmology of the working class majority in the harsh realities of poverty, crime, and systemic inequality. The Tokoloshe becomes a tangible face for the invisible, oppressive forces that ruin lives. And as the society has modernized, so too has the monster. In the 1980s and 90s, the Tokoloshe birthed a modern urban legend specifically tailored for school children, known as Pinky Pinky. Pinky Pinky is described as a half-human, half-creature with pink hair and glowing eyes that haunts primary school bathrooms. It targets young girls, particularly those wearing pink underwear, attacking them when they are isolated in the stalls. Folklorists and psychologists believe Pinky Pinky is a psychological manifestation of the very real, very horrific threat of gender-based violence and sexual assault that young girls face in public institutions. The monster evolved from a water sprite choking people in mud huts to a bathroom demon representing the trauma of puberty and the lack of safety in modern schools. The profound metaphorical weight of the Tokoloshe has not gone unnoticed by modern storytellers and filmmakers. The creature has transitioned from whispered campfire tales to the silver screen, acting as a powerful vehicle for social commentary. In the brilliant 2018 horror film simply titled The Tokoloshe, directed by Jerome Paiguan, the monster is stripped of its campy goblin status and deployed as a harrowing allegory for the epidemic of misogyny, abuse, and patriarchy. The film follows Busi, a young woman working as a night shift cleaner in a derelict, terrifying Johannesburg hospital. Busi is running from a deeply traumatic past, having been abused by the men in her life, including her own father. As she tries to save a young girl from the supernatural Tokoloshe haunting the hospital wards, the film forces the audience to ask a horrifying question. Who are the real monsters? Is it the mythological beast born of dark magic? Or is it the predatory hospital manager? Is it the creature hiding in the shadows? Or the men who perpetuate systemic violence against women every single day? By giving trauma a physical shape, the myth allows society to process the unspeakable. The Tokoloshe is a masterclass in the endurance and utility of mythology. It refuses to die because society still desperately needs it. It was born as a biological warning system, saving generations of South Africans from suffocating on the poisonous fumes of their own hearth fires. It evolved into a social enforcer, a hairy guardian of humility that warns against the destructive, corrosive power of human jealousy. It stepped into the courtroom as a desperate defense from murder, challenging the collision of indigenous belief and Western law. And today, it haunts the pages of tabloid newspapers and the frames of modern horror cinema, standing as a dark, unyielding metaphor for the very real monsters of sexual violence and systemic abuse. We raise our beds on bricks. We draw rings of protective, blessed salt around our doors. We burn sacred herbs to choke out the darkness. We do these things because, deep down, the human mind requires a face for the chaos of the world. As long as there is inexplicable tragedy, sudden death, and trauma in the dark, the Tokoloshe will continue to wait patiently under the bed. So, the next time you wake up in the middle of the night, completely paralyzed, feeling a heavy pressure on your chest, and sensing a dark presence in the corner of the room, just remember to check the height of your bed, because out there in the dark, the Tokoloshe is always watching.